Emma spun around her with the water bucket still in her hand and screamed at empty land. Mama, Papa! Nothing answered but wind. The wagon train, her family, her whole world was gone, swallowed by the horizon like it had never existed. No warning, no goodbye. No one had called her name before they rolled on without her. 20 years old alone in Colorado territory. 1867, she dropped to her knees in the dirt and whispered the words that would haunt her. They didn't forget me. They left me. Subscribe now. Stay with her story to the end and comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. The bucket hit the ground before Emma did. She had been gone 11 minutes, maybe 12, down to the creek and back. That was all filling water for the noon stop. Her mother's voice still ringing in her ears. Hurry now. Emma, they won't wait on us. And she had hurried. She had run the last 100 yards with the bucket banging against her knee and water sloshing over her wrist, and she had come up over the rise expecting to see the wagons exactly where she left them. They weren't there. For one long, stupid second, her mind simply refused to accept it. She stood at the top of the rise with the bucket forgotten in her hand, and she thought, I'm turned around. I came up the wrong side. She turned in a full circle, scanning the flat brown land in every direction, and there was nothing. No wagons, no oxen, no dust cloud on the horizon to tell her which way they'd gone. Nothing but grass bending in the wind and the empty blue sky pressing down on her like a lid. Papa, she called out. Her voice sounded small and strange to her own ears, swallowed up by all that open space. Mama? No one answered. She walked forward faster now, her boots catching on the uneven ground, and she told herself there was an explanation. There had to be an explanation. Wagon trains didn't just disappear. People didn't just leave a person behind like a dropped hat. She would come around the next bend and there they'd be, and her father would be red-faced and furious that she'd wandered so far for water, and her mother would fuss over her, and Nathaniel would tease her for getting lost, and this whole sick feeling clawing up her throat would turn out to be nothing. But there was no bend. There was no wagon train. There was only the broken trunk. She saw it from 30 yards off her mother's cedar trunk, the one with the brass hinges that had belonged to her grandmother, lying on its side in the grass with the lid cracked open and half its contents spilled out. A shawl, a tin of buttons, the little wooden box that held her mother's sewing needles split apart and scattered like teeth knocked from a jaw. Emma broke into a run. She dropped to her knees beside the trunk and pressed both hands against the splintered wood, as if she could hold it together, as if holding it together would somehow put everything else back the way it should be. Her fingers found the shawl and closed around it, and she pulled it to her chest, and that was when the shaking started. Not from cold, though the wind had teeth in it, but from something deeper, something that started in her stomach and worked its way out through her arms until her whole body trembled. No, she said, no, no, no. She looked up. She looked at the wheel ruts cut deep into the dirt, two parallel lines running west, already softening at the edges, where the wind had begun to erase them. She followed them with her eyes as far as she could see, and there was nothing there either. No wagons crawling along the horizon, no dust, no sound of oxen lowing or wheels creaking, or her father's voice calling out orders. They had gone, and they had gone a while ago. They didn't forget me, she whispered, and the words tasted like poison coming out of her mouth. They left me. She said it again louder, like saying it louder might make it less true. They left me. The wind took her voice and scattered it across the empty land, and nothing answered back. Emma had grown up hearing stories about the trail. Every family on the wagon train had lost someone or something to it, a child to fever, a father to a broken leg gone bad, an entire herd of cattle to a river crossing that turned deadly in an afternoon. She had heard those stories and felt sorry for the people in them, the way you feel sorry for characters in a book at a safe distance, never once imagining herself inside one. Now she was inside one. Now she was the girl left behind, and there was no comfortable distance left at all. She forced herself to stand. Her legs did not want to hold her, but she made them because sitting on the ground crying was not going to bring the wagons back. And if she wanted to see her family again, she was going to have to actually think the way her father always told her to when things went wrong. Panicking never solved a single problem, Emma. Not one. All right, think. They had left a trunk behind that meant something had gone wrong in a hurry. A trunk didn't fall off a wagon and split open like that unless the wagon had been moving fast or unless someone had been careless loading it back on after a stop. She looked closer at the wheel ruts, at the way they veered slightly, and a cold new thought slid into her chest. Something spooked them. Indians, outlaws, a stampede, any of a dozen things that made a wagon train move fast and leave a straggler's trunk behind without anyone noticing because everyone's attention was fixed on staying alive, not on counting heads. That thought should have terrified her more than the empty horizon had. Instead, strangely, it steadied her. If something had scared them into moving fast, then this wasn't some cruel, deliberate abandonment. It was chaos. It was an accident. It meant somewhere up ahead her mother was probably screaming her name into the wind, just like she was screaming into this one. And the moment they made camp for the night, someone would notice she wasn't there and they would turn back. They'll turn back. They have to turn back. She held onto that thought the way she'd held onto the shawl with both hands, refusing to let it go. The afternoon sun climbed and then began its long slide toward the horizon, and Emma sat by the broken trunk because she didn't know what else to do. Walking in the wrong direction could take her further from them. Staying put, she reasoned, gave them the best chance of finding her again if they did turn back. She wrapped the shawl around her shoulders against the wind, and she waited, and with every hour that passed, the silence around her grew heavier until it felt less like an absence of sound and more like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. By the time the sun touched the horizon, she understood something with a clarity that frightened her more than anything else had that day. They were not turning back tonight. Whatever had happened, Indians, outlaws, stampede sickness, some emergency she couldn't guess at, it had pushed them far enough, fast enough, that a return before dark simply wasn't going to happen. And that meant she was going to spend a night alone in Colorado Territory in the year 1867, in country her own father had described more than once as the kind of land that eats careless people alive. She had never in her life felt so completely alone. The first sound came just after dark, a long rising howl from somewhere off to the northwest, and then another answering it from a different direction, closer, close enough that Emma felt the hair rise on her arms beneath the shawl. Wolves. She scrambled to her feet, heart slamming, and looked around for anything at all that might serve as a weapon or a shelter. There was nothing, no trees close enough to climb, no rocks large enough to hide behind, just the broken trunk and the flat, endless dark, and somewhere out there things that hunted at night and would not care that she was a person, that she had a name, that somewhere her mother loved her. She thought about screaming for help and immediately understood how foolish that was. There was no one to hear her. Screaming would only tell the wolves exactly where she was. So instead, she did the only thing she could think to do. She climbed inside the broken trunk itself, curling her body into the space among the spilled belongings, pulling the splintered lid half closed over her like a shell, and she lay there in the dark with her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. And she prayed not the polite, formal prayer she said in church, but a raw, desperate, bargaining kind of prayer. Please, please, just let me see the sun again. I'll do anything. Just let me live through this night. And somewhere in the middle of that prayer, exhaustion finally dragged her down into a thin, shivering half-sleep. She woke to the sound of a horse. For one confused, hopeful second, she thought they came back, and she shoved the trunk lid open and scrambled up, already forming her father's name on her lips. It wasn't her father. A single rider set his horse 30 yards off a dark shape against the pale gray of early dawn, still and watchful in a way that made every instinct in her body scream danger. Emma froze half in and half out of the trunk, one hand braced on the splintered wood, her mind racing through every terrible possibility. Outlaw, desert, or worse, and she opened her mouth, though she had no idea what she meant to say, plead or scream or simply beg. Easy, the rider said before she could get a single word out. His voice was low, rough, unhurried, the voice of a man who did not startle easily and did not intend to startle her either. I'm not going to hurt you. Stay back, Emma said, and her voice cracked embarrassingly on the second word. She groped behind her without looking, her fingers closing around the only thing within reach, a fire iron that had spilled from the trunk, cold and heavy in her hand. She held it up like it might actually stop a man on horseback. I mean it. Stay back. The rider didn't move any closer. He sat there for a long moment, studying her, and in the growing light, she could make out more of him now, a lean, hard-built man, maybe 30, a rifle across his saddle, that he had not raised a face that looked like it had weathered more than its share of hard winters. There was something in his eyes when he looked at her, at the broken trunk, at the churned-up wheel ruts leading west, that she couldn't quite name. Not hunger, not menace, something closer to grim understanding. "You're alone out here," he said. It wasn't a question. "My family's wagon train is just ahead," Emma said quickly, too quickly, and even as the lie left her mouth, she knew it hadn't landed the way she wanted it to. "They'll be coming back for me any minute." The rider's eyes went to the wheel ruts again, then to the sky, calculating something. "Those tracks are near on a full day old," he said. "Whoever made them isn't a minute from turning around. They're most of 2 days gone by now if they kept the pace those ruts are telling me they kept." "You don't know that." "I know tracks," he said simply. "Been reading them a long time." Emma's grip tightened on the fire iron, though her arm had begun to shake from holding it up so long. "Then why haven't they come back for me?" Something shifted in the man's face, not cruelty, but a reluctance to say what he was about to say, like a doctor about to deliver bad news he wished he didn't have to. "Could be 100 reasons," he said. "None of them good if I'm being honest with you, and I figure you'd rather have honest than comfortable right now." "Say it then." Something ran them off hard. Indians maybe, or a gang working this stretch of trail. "There's been trouble reported through here all month. Once a train starts running, scared they don't stop to count heads. They just run and they keep running till they feel safe, and by the time anybody thinks to look around and ask who's missing." He stopped himself. "Say it," Emma said again, though every part of her didn't want to hear it. "By the time they look around, they're too far gone to come back for you without risking everybody else." The words hit her like a physical blow. She had known it somewhere underneath the desperate bargaining prayers of the night before, but hearing it said plainly by a stranger who had no reason to lie to her made it undeniably horribly real. "They left me," she said. And this time there was no question mark at the end of it, only the flat, dead certainty of fact. "Maybe not on purpose," the rider said, and there was something almost gentle in the way he said it, a small mercy offered to a stranger. "But left is left, whatever the reason behind it." Emma lowered the fire iron slowly. Her arm had gone numb from holding it, or maybe it was just that she no longer saw the point. What good was a fire iron against a world this big and this empty and this willing to swallow a person whole? "Who are you?" she asked. "Noah Tanner." He touched 2 fingers to his hat brim, an old habit that looked strange against the hard set of his jaw. "I run cattle through this territory when the trails are clear, and I scout for the army when they need a man who knows this ground better than the maps do." "And what are you doing here?" "Same as you, near enough. Trying to get from one place to another without dying on the way." A ghost of something, not quite a smile, crossed his face. "Difference is, I know how." Emma's pride flared up hot and sudden, the last useful thing she had left. "I don't need your help." Noah's gaze swept slowly over her, the torn hem of her dress, the shawl clutched around shoulders that had shivered through a night alone in wolf country, the fire iron still clenched white-knuckled in her hand, and he didn't say anything at all. He didn't have to. The silence said it plainly enough. "Look at yourself. There's a war party moved through the Arkansas Valley 2 days back," he said, finally businesslike now, as if her pride hadn't registered with him at all. "And there's a gang running this stretch that's worse than any Indians you'll meet, take my word on that. You stay out here alone another night, you won't need to worry about your family finding you. There won't be anything left to find." "That's not true." "It's true enough that I've buried 3 men who thought otherwise," Noah said, and something in the flatness of his voice told her he wasn't exaggerating for effect. He wasn't a man who needed to exaggerate. "I'm not asking you to trust me because I'm charming, ma'am. I'm asking because the alternative is a hole in the ground with your name on it if anybody's even around to dig it." Emma opened her mouth to argue again, some retort about proper introductions, about a lady not riding off with a strange man, all the rules her mother had drilled into her about propriety and caution, and then, as if the universe wanted to make his point for him, a long, low howl rose up from somewhere behind her, closer than the ones from the night before, and this time it wasn't alone. A second howl joined it, and a third, and Emma felt every hair on her arms rise at once. Noah didn't flinch. He simply watched her waiting. "They're circling," he said quietly. "Been smelling you out since sunup, most likely. Wolves don't usually come at people in daylight unless they're desperate or unless there's a pack big enough to feel bold. Either way, that's not a fight you want, and it's not one I particularly want either, not with just my rifle and no cover. No. Fear finally cracked through the last of Emma's pride, and beneath the fear was something rawer and more honest, the plain animal understanding that she did not want to die alone in the grass with wolves closing in around her, that whatever the rules were about strange men and propriety, none of them accounted for a situation like this one. "What do I do?" she asked, and her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. Noah swung down off his horse in one smooth motion, closing half the distance between them before stopping, giving her room, giving her the choice even now. He held out a hand, not grabbing, not demanding, just offering. "You ride with me now," he said. 4 words, simple, plain spoken, without a trace of drama, and yet Emma felt them land somewhere deep in her chest, a strange collision of terror and relief so tangled together she couldn't separate them. Everything in her, raised on instinct, screamed caution. She knew nothing about this man, nothing beyond a name and a hard face and a voice that didn't waste words, and yet underneath that instinct was something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with logic. His voice didn't sound like danger. It sounded absurdly, impossibly like the first solid ground she'd stood on since the wagons disappeared over that horizon. The howls rose again, closer now. Emma looked at the broken trunk, at the shawl and the scattered buttons and the ruined sewing needles, all that remained of the life she'd woken up in yesterday morning, and she understood with sudden sick clarity that staying here meant one thing and one thing only. She dropped the fire iron. She took his hand. His grip was callous and sure, and he pulled her up onto the horse behind him with an ease that told her he'd done this before, though she didn't let herself wonder under what circumstances. She wrapped her arms around his waist because there was nothing else to hold on to, and she felt the tension coiled through his whole body, alert, listening, already scanning the land around them for the next threat. "Hold on," he said. She did. The horse broke into a run, and behind them the howling rose into a frustrated chorus that slowly faded into the wind, and Emma pressed her face against the rough wool of a stranger's coat and let herself cry finally silently for the family that had vanished over the horizon and left nothing behind but a broken trunk and a girl who had no choice left but to trust a man she'd known for less than 5 minutes. They rode hard for the better part of an hour before Noah finally slowed the horse to a walk, both of them scanning the empty land for any sign of pursuit, wolves or worse. When nothing appeared, he let out a breath Emma hadn't realized he'd been holding, and some of the coiled tension eased out of his shoulders. "You're safe for now," he said. "For now," Emma repeated, hearing the qualifier land heavy in the silence after it. "That's not exactly comforting." "I don't deal in comfort," Noah said. "I deal in true things. Comfort's got a way of getting people killed out here, makes them careless, makes them think danger's further off than it is. True things keep you alive." Emma studied the back of his head, the set of his shoulders, trying to piece together what kind of man spoke that way so plainly, so devoid of the polite softening most people use to make hard truths easier to swallow. "You talk like a man who's seen a lot of people die," she said. His silence lasted long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer at all. "I fought into the war," he said it finally. 4 years of it, seen enough dying to last 10 lifetimes, and most of it happened because somebody told somebody else a comfortable lie right before it was too late to tell them the truth instead." He paused. "I don't make that mistake anymore." "Which side?" Emma asked, though some instinct told her the answer mattered less to him than it might have mattered to other men. "Doesn't matter anymore. War's over. Only thing that matters now is staying alive in a territory that doesn't much care whether a person's a good shot or a bad one, a Union man or a Confederate one. It kills all of them just the same given the chance." They rode on in silence for a while, and Emma found herself studying the landscape with new eyes. Every rock outcropping a possible hiding place for danger, every stand of scrub brush, a place a man could wait in ambush, every distant silhouette, a question mark that made her pulse spike until Noah's calm, unbothered posture told her it was nothing to fear. She realized with something like awe that he was reading this country the way she might read a book, fluently, effortlessly, seeing things in the land that were entirely invisible to her. "How do you know all this?" she asked. "Reading the ground, I mean. Knowing how old the tracks are." "Same way you'd know your mother's handwriting from a stranger's," Noah said. "Time. Repetition. You spend enough years depending on a skill to keep you breathing, you get good at it fast, or you don't get the chance to get good at anything at all." That's a hard way to live. It's the only way that's kept me alive this long. He glanced back at her, then just briefly, and something in his gaze shifted, softened, almost imperceptibly. You did well back there for what it's worth. Most folks panic worse than you did. Climbing into that trunk instead of running blind in the dark, that was smart thinking. Probably saved your life. The unexpected praise caught Emma off guard, warming something in her chest that the cold night and the terror of the wolves had left frozen. I didn't feel smart, she admitted. I felt like I was going to die. Feeling that way and doing the smart thing anyway, that's most of what courage actually is, Noah said. Anybody tells you courage means not being afraid, they've never actually been in a situation worth being afraid of. They rode for another hour before the first sign of real trouble appeared, a thin column of dust on the horizon behind them rising and drifting east on the wind. Noah's whole body went taut the instant he spotted it, and he pulled the horse to a stop, twisting in the saddle to study it with narrowed eyes. That's riders, he said quietly. 6, maybe 8, moving fast. Emma's stomach dropped. My family. No. His voice was flat, certain. Wagon trains don't kick up dust like that. That's men on horseback riding hard, and riding hard usually means one of two things: running from something or chasing something. He paused, and the pause stretched long enough that Emma felt the weight of what he wasn't saying. Given the direction and given the pace, I don't much like the odds that they're running from something. You think they're chasing us? Noah didn't answer right away. He turned the horse off the trail, angling toward a shallow depression in the land where a dry creek bed cut through the grass, offering at least some cover from open sight. I think, he said slowly, that there's a man named Barlow running this stretch of territory who's been wanting a piece of me for the better part of a year. And I think if that's his men back there, it wouldn't much matter to them that you've got nothing to do with any of it. Wait, what does that mean? Why would anyone be chasing you? It's a long story, and now's not the time for it, Noah said, urging the horse into a faster walk along the creek bed, keeping them low, keeping them hidden. Short version, I killed 2 of his men 8 months back, defending a rancher's herd that Barlow figured belonged to him instead. Man like Barlow doesn't forget a thing like that. He collects debts, and he collects them slow on his own time when a man's least ready to pay. Emma's arms tightened around his waist, fear spiking fresh and sharp. You didn't tell me any of this before I got on this horse. Didn't seem relevant an hour ago when the choice was me or the wolves, Noah said, and there was no apology in his voice, only the same flat honesty he had offered from the start. It's relevant now. I won't lie to you about that. So what do? We keep moving, and we stay low, and we hope that dust cloud belongs to somebody else's trouble and not ours. He glanced back at her one more time, and for just a moment, something almost like regret crossed his weathered face. I'm sorry, genuinely. You didn't ask for any part of this. I didn't ask for any of what's happened to me in the last day, Emma said, and to her own surprise, there was no self-pity in it, only a hard, clear-eyed acknowledgement of fact. Family gone wolves, now outlaws chasing us. I suppose the only thing I can do is keep breathing and see where it leads. Something shifted in Noah's expression, surprise maybe, or something closer to respect. That's about the healthiest way I've ever heard anybody put it, he said. They pushed the horse harder now, following the dry creek bed as it wound deeper into rougher country canyon walls beginning to rise up on either side, offering shadow and cover. But also, Emma realized, with a fresh spike of dread narrowing their options, if the riders behind them figured out where they'd gone. The dust cloud grew closer. They've spotted our trail, Noah said, and for the first time since she'd met him, real urgency sharpened his voice. Barlow's men know this country near as well as I do. Hiding in a dry creek bed's not going to fool them for long. Then what do? He scanned the canyon walls, rising around them, calculating something Emma couldn't follow, some map of the terrain only he could read. There's a narrow pass about 2 miles ahead, he said. If we can reach it before they close the gap, I can hold them there. One man can bottleneck a dozen in a place like that long enough for you to get clear. You mean long enough for you to get killed while I run, Emma said, and the words came out sharper than she intended, edged with a fear that surprised her with its intensity. Fear not just for herself now, but for him. No, I'm not doing that. You don't have much say in it given the circumstances. I have plenty of say, Emma snapped back, gripping his coat tighter. You didn't leave me to die back there. I'm not leaving you to die here. We find another way, or we find no way at all together." Noah was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice had changed, not softer exactly, but different, like he was recalculating something more than just terrain. "All right," he said, "there's a chance. Slim one. There's a rock slide about a mile past the pass, old one from a few years back. If we can bring part of it down behind us, it'll block the trail long enough to buy real distance. Risky as hell to try, while riders are closing on us, but it's better odds than a straight fight in a bottleneck." "Then that's what we do." The horse surged forward at Noah's urging hooves, pounding hard against the packed dirt of the creek bed, and behind them, faintly now, Emma could hear the first distant crack of rifle fire. A warning shot, or maybe not a warning at all. Maybe the opening note of something far worse. "They're shooting," she shouted over the wind. "Testing range," Noah shouted back. "We're still out of it. Won't stay that way long." The canyon walls rose higher around them as they rode, narrowing the sky overhead into a thin blue ribbon, and Emma felt the walls pressing in on her chest as much as they pressed in on the trail, the sense of being funneled towards some inevitable confrontation she had no way to stop and no way to escape. Another crack of rifle fire closer this time, and Emma felt the horse stumble slightly beneath them, not hit, she realized, with a wash of relief, just startled by the sound before Noah steadied it with a sharp command and pushed it faster still. "There," he shouted, pointing ahead to where the canyon wall bulged outward in an unstable-looking shelf of loose rock and scree, clearly the remnant of some old collapse that hadn't quite finished falling. "That's it. We ride past, and I put a shot into the base of it. If I judge it right, it'll bring enough rock down to block the trail. And if you judge it wrong, then we find out real quick how fast this horse can run," Noah said grimly, and Emma decided she didn't need to ask any more questions after that. They thundered past the unstable shelf, and Noah twisted in the saddle rifle, already rising to his shoulder, and fired a single shot into the rock face just below the overhang. For one terrible suspended second, nothing happened at all, and Emma's heart seized with the fear that the plan had failed entirely. And then with a groan like the earth itself protesting, the shelf gave way, sending a cascade of rock and dust crashing down across the narrow trail behind them. The horse surged forward under Noah's urging, putting distance between them and the collapse. And behind them, muffled now by the rockfall and the rising cloud of dust, Emma heard shouts of confusion and anger, and beneath it all, the frustrated whinny of horses that had just lost their trail entirely. "Did it work?" Emma called out, not daring to look back and see for herself. "Enough," Noah said, though his voice carried a tension that told her this was a temporary reprieve, not a resolution. "Enough to slow them. Not enough to stop them for good. Barlow's men will find a way around eventually. They know this country too well not to. So they're still coming." "They're still coming," Noah confirmed. "But we've bought ourselves time, and out here, time's about the most valuable thing there is." They rode on in a tense, watchful silence as the canyon widened again, opening back onto flatter ground, and Emma finally allowed herself to look back the way they'd come. The dust cloud of the rock slide still hung heavy in the canyon's mouth, and there was no sign yet of riders emerging from it, though she knew she believed him completely on this point, that it was only a matter of time. "Noah," she said quietly, testing the name in her mouth for the first time, "why are these men really after you? The real story, not the short version." He was quiet for a long moment, guiding the horse around a cluster of rocks, before he finally answered. "Barlow's been running a scheme through this territory for the better part of 2 years, he said. Cattle theft mostly, but not just simple rustling. He's been altering brands, forging bills of sale, selling stolen herds to buyers 3 counties over who don't ask too many questions. I stumbled onto part of it while scouting for the army, saw more than I should have, and when his men came to make sure I didn't talk, things went bad for them instead of me." "You killed them." "I killed them," Noah confirmed, no hesitation, no attempt to soften it. "Wasn't proud of it then, and I'm not proud of it now, but I'll tell you plainly, given the same circumstances, I'd do it again. They came to silence me. I made sure they were the ones silenced instead. And Barlow's wanted revenge ever since. Revenge and something more practical besides. I know things about his operation that could see him hanged if the right people ever heard it from a credible witness. Man like that doesn't just want revenge. He wants me dead before I ever get the chance to tell my story to a federal marshal." Noah's jaw tightened. "That's the truth of it, plain as I can give it to you. I'm sorry you got pulled into the middle of it." Emma sat with that for a long moment, feeling the weight of it settle into her chest, alongside everything else. The loss of her family, the terror of the night alone, the wolves, and now this, a war between a good man and a criminal empire that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with her survival now, regardless. "I'm not sorry," she said finally, and meant it even as the words surprised her coming out of her own mouth. Noah glanced back at her brow, furrowing slightly. "You should be. This isn't your fight." "Maybe not," Emma said. "But you didn't have to stop for me back there. You could have ridden right past that broken trunk and never looked back, and nobody would have ever known or blamed you for it. You stopped anyway. You're fighting for me now, the same as you're fighting for yourself. Seems to me the least I can do is not apologize for existing in the middle of it." Something passed across Noah's face, then surprise, and beneath the surprise, something warmer. Something he seemed to catch himself feeling and quickly push back down, as though he wasn't a man accustomed to being looked at with anything other than suspicion or fear. "We should keep moving," he said, instead turning back to the trail ahead. "There's a river crossing about 3 hours from here. If we can reach it before dark, and if the current's not running too high this time of year, it'll cut our trail clean in half for anybody trying to track us on horseback. And if the current is running high, then we'll have a different problem to solve," Noah said. "One thing at a time. That's the only way to survive out here. Solve the problem in front of you, then solve the next one, and don't waste breath worrying about the ones you can't see yet." They rode on through the long afternoon, the sun tracking slowly westward, the land shifting from open plains to rockier broken terrain that Noah navigated with the same unhurried confidence he'd shown from the very first moment Emma had seen him. She found herself watching him more than the landscape, now studying the way he scanned the horizon constantly without ever seeming anxious about it, the way his hands stayed loose and ready on the reins, the quiet economy of every movement he made. "You've done this before," she said. "Protected someone, I mean. Run from men like Barlow's crew." "More times than I care to count," Noah admitted. "Scouting work, Brum, brings a man into more trouble than most folks would believe. You learn to read danger the way you'd read weather, see it coming before it arrives, and you've got a fighting chance. Miss it, and you're caught out in the open when the storm hits. Did you ever lose anyone protecting them, I mean?" The question hung in the air a long moment before Noah answered, and when he did, his voice had gone quieter, rougher around the edges. "Once," he said, "during the war, a young private under my command, barely 18 years old, and I made a call that got him killed instead of me. Been carrying that particular weight a long time now, and I don't imagine I'll ever set it down entirely." "I'm sorry," Emma said softly. "Don't be. It taught me something I needed to learn, even if the lesson cost more than it should have. Taught me that hesitation gets people killed faster than boldness does most times. Since then, when I see danger coming, I don't wait around weighing options. I act and I live with whatever comes of it." Emma absorbed this in silence, understanding now something deeper about the man whose waist she still held onto the hard edges of him, shaped by loss as much as by skill. And she found herself, despite everything, despite the terror of the last day, despite the outlaws somewhere behind them, despite the uncertain and dangerous road still ahead, feeling something she hadn't expected to feel again, so soon after losing everything. She felt for the first time since the wagons disappeared over that horizon, something that might have been the very beginning of safety. The sun continued its slow descent, painting long shadows across the broken land, and somewhere behind them, unseen but never forgotten, Barlow's men were already finding their way round the rock slide, already picking up the trail again, already closing the distance, mile by determined mile. The river was still hours away. The danger was far from over. And Emma Morgan, 20 years old, abandoned in the wilderness and rescued by a stranger with blood on his hands, and a debt of vengeance riding hard behind him, understood with sudden bone-deep certainty that the woman who climbed onto this horse was not the same woman who had walked down to the creek for water the morning before. That woman was gone, left behind on the trail, same as her family had left her. Whoever she was becoming, instead she was only just beginning to find out. The river came into view sooner than Noah expected, a wide brown ribbon cutting through the flatland ahead, and the sight of it should have brought relief. Instead, his whole body went rigid. "That's not good," he muttered. Emma felt the change in him immediately. What's wrong?" "Current's running high. Look at the color of it. That snowmelt water, fast and full. 3 days ago, that crossing would have been an easy ford. Today, it's going to fight us the whole way. Can we still cross? We don't have much choice." Noah's eyes swept the trail behind them, calculating. Barlow's men lost time at the rock slide, but they'll have found a way around it by now. We stay on this side waiting for the water to drop. They'll be on top of us before sundown. Emma's arms tightened around his waist. Then we cross. Just like that. No argument. You said solve the problem in front of you, she said. The river's in front of us. Barlow's men are behind us. That's not much of a choice at all. Something like a smile ghosted across Noah's face, the first she'd seen from him, before it vanished under the weight of the task ahead. He walked the horse down toward the bank, studying the water with narrowed eyes, reading the current, the same way he'd read the tracks that morning. We go in at an angle, he said. Fighting straight against the current will exhaust the horse before we're halfway. We let it carry us some aim for that gravel bar downstream and work back toward the far bank from there. You've done this before. Once or twice. Never with a passenger who mattered as much as this one does. He glanced back at her, and for a moment something unguarded passed between them before he shook it off and nudged the horse forward. Hold on tight. Whatever happens, don't let go of me. I won't. The water hit them cold and hard the moment the horse's hooves left solid ground, and Emma gasped as the current shoved against her legs, powerful and relentless, dragging at the horse's flank with a strength that made the animal scream in protest. Noah's whole body tensed, fighting to keep them angled correctly, his voice low and steady even as the water climbed higher. Easy, easy, he said, though Emma couldn't tell if he was talking to the horse or to her. We're doing fine, just hold on. A submerged branch caught against the horse's leg, and the animal lurched sideways, nearly throwing them both. Emma's scream tore out of her before she could stop it, her grip slipping for one terrifying half-second before she caught herself, fingers digging hard into Noah's coat. I've got you, Noah shouted over the roar of the water. I've got you, don't let go. I'm trying. The horse found its footing again, and Noah guided it hard toward the gravel, bar muscles, straining water churning white around them. Emma felt the cold seeping into her bones, her teeth chattering, her whole body screaming at her to give up and let the current take her. And she fought that instinct with everything she had, because giving up now meant more than her own death. It meant failing the only person who'd chosen to fight for her. They reached the gravel bar, with the horse trembling and blowing hard beneath them, and Noah allowed himself exactly 3 seconds of relief before his eyes cut sharply back toward the far bank, toward the rest of the crossing still ahead of them. We're not done, he said. Second half shallower, but the current pulls harder near the far bank. Stay with me. Where else would I go? He almost smiled again. Almost. They pushed back into the water, and this stretch fought harder than the first, the current dragging at them with a strength that made Noah grunt with effort, his arms burning as he held the reins steady, refusing to let the river win. Emma pressed her face against his back and simply held on, trusting him with a completeness that would have terrified her a day earlier, back when he was a stranger on a horse and she was a girl with a fire iron and no other options. The horse's hooves finally found solid ground on the far bank, and it scrambled up out of the water with a final desperate lunge, and Emma nearly sobbed with relief as dry land came under them again. We made it, she gasped. We actually made it. We made it, Noah agreed, though his eyes were already scanning back across the river toward the bank they'd left. Question now is how long it takes them to figure out we crossed and whether the water's still high enough to slow them down when they try. As if summoned by his words, movement flickered on the far bank riders, 6 of them emerging from the tree line at a hard gallop, pulling up short at the water's edge. There, Noah said grimly. That answers that. Emma's heart lurched. They're going to cross too. Maybe, maybe not. Noah watched intently as the riders argued among themselves, gesturing at the water, clearly debating the risk. That water nearly took us under, and we crossed light, 1 horse, 2 riders who know what they're doing, 6 horses trying to cross together in a hurry, less careful about it. That's a different kind of gamble. One of the riders spurred his horse forward into the water anyway, and for a moment Emma's breath caught in her throat, waiting to see if the current would show him the same mercy it had shown them. It didn't. The horse stumbled almost immediately, throwing its rider into the churning water, and the animal itself was swept sideways, screaming legs flailing helplessly against a current with far more power than the beast could fight. The rider surfaced downstream, coughing, dragged himself toward the gravel bar Noah and Emma had used minutes before, and the remaining 5 riders on the far bank shouted and gestured clearly, reconsidering their odds. "That's one down." Noah said something grim and satisfied in his voice. "And 5 men a lot less eager to follow him in. They'll find another way across eventually. Won't they?" "Eventually," Noah admitted. "But eventually buys us hours, maybe most of a day, if they've got sense enough to look for a proper ford instead of trying to force this crossing again. Hours matter out here. Hours are the difference between reaching town safe and getting caught in open country after dark." He turned the horse and urged it into a walk, putting distance between them and the river, and Emma allowed herself one long breath of something like hope before a new worry crept in to replace the old one. "Noah," she said, "the horse, is it hurt?" He was quiet a moment, feeling the animal's gait beneath him, and Emma could tell he was doing the same careful assessment he did with everything else, reading the truth of the situation rather than hoping for the comfortable version of it. "She's tiring," he said finally. "Crossing like that takes something out of an animal, and we've already ridden her hard most of the day. She's got some miles left in her, but not unlimited ones. We'll need to rest her soon or risk losing her when we need her most." "Is there somewhere safe to do that?" "There's an old line shack about 5 miles from here," Noah said. "Belongs to a rancher I've done work for before, name of Whitfield. Empty most of the year except roundup season. It's not much, but it's shelter, and it's off the main trail enough that Barlow's men would have to know exactly where to look to find it." "Do you trust it?" "I trust it enough to bet both our lives on it, which I suppose I'm already doing just by suggesting it." He glanced back at her. "You have a better idea I'm listening." Emma didn't. "No, the shack sounds good." They rode on in a silence that had shifted somehow since the river crossing. Less wary now, less like 2 strangers thrown together by circumstance, more like something else Emma didn't quite have a word for yet. She found herself studying the line of his shoulders, the careful, deliberate way he moved through danger, and she realized with a small jolt of surprise that somewhere in the last few hours her fear of him had transformed entirely into something closer to faith. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You've been asking me things all day. Don't see why you'd stop now." "Why did you stop for me, really? You didn't know me. You had no reason to risk anything for a stranger sitting by a broken trunk." Noah was quiet long enough that Emma thought he might not answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice had a rough, unpracticed honesty to it, like a man saying something out loud for the first time. "I've ridden past a lot of things in my life I shouldn't have ridden past," he said. "Men I could have helped and didn't. Choices I made because helping seemed too costly, too dangerous, too much trouble for a stranger who wasn't my responsibility. I've carried every one of those choices with me since, heavier than any of the ones where I actually did something." He paused. "Saw you sitting there yesterday morning alone, scared, doing everything right, and still losing anyway. And I figured, not this one, not again. Whatever it cost me, not this one." Emma didn't say anything for a while after that, letting his words settle into her chest alongside everything else the day had given her. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "I'm glad you didn't ride past." "So am I," Noah said, and something in the plain simplicity of it struck her harder than any more elaborate declaration could have. The line shack appeared ahead of them as the sun dipped low toward the horizon. A small, weathered structure tucked into a fold of land that made it nearly invisible until they were almost on top of it. Noah drew the horse to a stop a good distance away, studying it carefully before approaching. "Wait here," he said, sliding down from the saddle. "Let me make sure it's empty before we go any closer." "You think someone could be inside?" "I think assuming empty places are actually empty is how careless men end up dead." "Won't take but a minute." Emma watched him approach the shack with his rifle held ready, moving with the same careful, unhurried confidence he brought to everything, and she felt a fresh wave of something like awe at how completely he seemed to belong in this hard, dangerous country, a man shaped entirely by the demands of survival. He disappeared inside for a long moment, and Emma's pulse climbed with every second he was out of sight, until finally he reappeared in the doorway and waved her forward. "Empty," he confirmed, "and there's a stove, some dry wood stacked already. We can risk a small fire once it's full. Dark smoke won't show against a night sky the way it would in daylight." Emma slid down from the horse, her legs nearly buckling from exhaustion and hours of riding, and Noah caught her elbow before she could stumble, steadying her with a grip that was firm and careful all at once. "Easy," he said. You've been through more in the last day than most folks go through in a year. Body's got a right to feel it. I feel like I could sleep for a week. Sleep's going to have to wait a bit longer. Need to get the horse settled, get that fire going, see what we've got in the way of food. But you can rest while I handle the horse. You've earned that much. Emma sank down onto the shack's single rough bench, watching through the open door as Noah unsaddled the horse and rubbed it down with practiced, efficient movements, murmuring low words to the animal that Emma couldn't quite make out, but that seemed to calm it all the same. There was a gentleness in him she hadn't expected buried beneath the hard exterior, the sort of gentleness that only showed itself in small, unguarded moments like this one. By the time full dark had settled over the land, Noah had a small fire crackling in the shack's stove, its light carefully shielded from any window that might betray their position to eyes searching the darkness outside. He produced a small amount of dried meat and hardtack from his saddlebags, sharing it without hesitation, and Emma ate with a hunger that embarrassed her, slightly aware of how many hours it had been since she'd eaten anything at all. "Thank you," she said once the worst of her hunger had eased, "for all of it. The river, the shack, the food. I don't know how I would have survived any of this without you." "You'd have found a way," Noah said. "You're tougher than you know. Climbing into that trunk instead of running blind, that wasn't luck. That was good instinct under pressure. Most people don't have that. Instinct only gets a person so far against wolves and rivers and men with rifles." True enough, but instinct paired with somebody who knows the ground, that's a fighting chance. That's more than most folks get out here. He fed another piece of wood into the small stove, watching the flames catch. "We'll rest here a few hours. Can't risk more than that. Barlow's men will find a way across that river eventually, and I'd rather be moving again before they do." "Where are we headed after this, I mean? Once we're moving again?" "Pueblo," Noah said. "Good-sized town, proper law telegraph office. Once we reach it, you can wire word out about your family. Somebody along that wagon train's route is bound to have heard something, and Pueblo's central enough that word travels through it regular. And I can report what I know about Barlow's operation to the territorial marshal station there. Man's been wanting solid evidence against Barlow for the better part of a year. What I've seen might finally be enough to end this properly instead of running from it forever." "How far is Pueblo?" 2 days riding hard pace. Longer if we have to detour around trouble." He glanced at her, something considering in his expression. "I won't lie to you about the danger between here and there. Barlow's men aren't going to give up just because a river slowed them down. They'll regroup, they'll find another crossing, and they'll come looking again. Whole way to Pueblo, we're going to be watching over our shoulders." Emma absorbed this with a steadiness that surprised even herself. 24 hours ago, the thought of days more running from armed men would have shattered her completely. Now it simply settled into the growing list of hard truths she'd learned to carry since the wagons vanished over that horizon. "Then we watch over our shoulders," she said, "together." Noah looked at her for a long moment across the small fire, something shifting behind his eyes that Emma couldn't quite name. Surprise maybe, or something warmer and more complicated than surprise. "You keep saying that word," he said, "together. Is that a problem?" "No," he said, quieter now. "No, it's not a problem at all. Just not a word I've had much use for most of my life. Man in my line of work learns to expect he's on his own mostly. Learns not to lean on anybody because leaning on someone just gives fate one more person to take away from you. And now, Tato," Noah said slowly, "I'm starting to think maybe I had that backward." The moment stretched between them warm and fragile before a sharp sound outside shattered it entirely, the horse whinnying in sudden alarm. Noah was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, moving toward the door, with the fluid speed of a man whose body had long since memorized the mechanics of danger. "Stay here," he said, voice dropped low. "Stay down, stay quiet, no matter what you hear." "Noah, I mean it, Emma. Whatever happens, you stay hidden." He slipped out into the darkness, and Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself into the shadow corner of the shack, straining to hear anything beyond the pounding of her own pulse. Long seconds passed. A minute, 2. The silence outside felt heavier than any sound could have been, thick with unknown threat. Then she heard voices, low, unfamiliar, definitely not Noah's, and her blood ran cold. "Easy now," one voice said, rough and unfamiliar. "Didn't figure to find anybody out this far." "You alone. Emma couldn't hear Noah's response, but she heard the tension and the pause that followed the careful, measured quality of whatever he said back. Funny, the rough voice said, 'cause we're looking for a man matches your description real close. Fella been causing some trouble for a friend of ours. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Emma's hand flew to her mouth to stifle the gasp that wanted to escape. These weren't Barlow's original riders. These were different men. Maybe scouts sent ahead. Maybe an entirely separate patrol working the same territory. Either way, the danger was the same, and it was standing feet away from the only person keeping her alive. Don't know what you're talking about. Noah's voice came calm, deliberately unhurried. Just passing through, nothing more to it than that. That's so. A pause heavy with suspicion. Mind if we take a look in that shack behind you, just to be thorough? Emma's whole body went rigid with terror. If they found her, if they realized Noah wasn't alone. Shack's empty, Noah said. Was fixing to bed down for the night myself before you rode up. Don't mind if we check all the same. Emma heard boots moving, coming closer, and every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to do something. And in that frozen, terrified second, she made a choice that surprised even herself. She grabbed the shawl from her shoulders, wrapped it hastily around her head and face like a bandage, and dropped to the floor near the stove, pressing herself flat and still feigning unconsciousness, feigning injury, anything to buy Noah room to work with. The door creaked open, lantern light spilled into the small space, and Emma held her breath, forcing her body into perfect stillness, praying with everything she had that the ruse would hold. What's this? The rough voice said, sharp with sudden interest. My sister, Noah said smoothly, without a beat of hesitation, stepping into the doorway behind the man. Fever's got her bad, was hoping the fire might help some, but she's not been right since yesterday morning. You want to help doctors a couple days ride from here? That'd be appreciated. The lie landed with such easy practice confidence that Emma nearly believed it herself, and she forced her breathing to stay slow and shallow, playing her part with everything she had. The man in the doorway hesitated, clearly weighing the scene in front of him, and for one unbearable moment, Emma thought the ruse had failed, thought the next sound she heard would be a gun, cocking a voice calling out an accusation. Sorry to trouble you, the man said instead, backing out of the doorway. Didn't mean to disturb a sick woman. Hope she pulls through. Appreciate that, Noah said. The door closed. Boots retreated. Voices murmured further away, then horses moved off into the night, and it was a full 3 minutes before Noah finally slipped back inside, exhaling a long, shaking breath that told Emma exactly how close that had actually been. That was either the smartest thing I've ever seen someone do under pressure, he said, or the most reckless, possibly both at once. Emma sat up slowly, her whole body trembling now that the danger had passed. Did it work? Are they gone? For now. That won't be the last patrol working this stretch, though. Barlow's spreading men wider than I realized, which tells me he wants this settled bad. Noah crouched beside her, studying her face in the dim firelight, something careful and searching in his expression. You did well, better than well. Quick thinking like that under that kind of pressure, that's not something you can teach a person. Either they've got it or they don't. I was terrified. Being terrified and still thinking clear, that's the same thing I told you before. That's courage, whether you feel like it deserves the word or not. They sat together in the small circle of firelight, the adrenaline of the near encounter slowly draining out of both of them, leaving behind a fragile, exhausted quiet. Emma found herself studying Noah's face in the flickering light, the hard lines of it softened now by relief and something gentler underneath. We should try to rest, Noah said finally. Few hours at least. Long ride tomorrow, and today's already asked more of both of us than most days ever do. What if they come back? Then we deal with it same as we've dealt with everything else so far. He offered her something that might, in the right light, have qualified as a smile. One problem at a time, remember. Emma allowed herself a small, tired laugh, the first genuine laugh she'd managed since the wagons disappeared over that horizon 2 mornings ago. One problem at a time, she agreed. She curled up near the stove's fading warmth, exhaustion finally overtaking the last of her adrenaline, and just before sleep claimed her, she heard Noah settle near the door rifle across his lap, keeping watch the way he'd clearly done countless nights before, protecting people who might never fully understand the cost of that vigilance. Noah, she murmured, half asleep already. Yeah, thank you for everything today. There was a pause long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Get some sleep, Emma," he said quietly. "Tomorrow's going to ask a lot of both of us." She was asleep before she could respond, and if Noah said anything more into the darkness after that, she never knew it. Dawn came hard and fast, Noah shaking her awake before the sky had fully lightened urgency written plain across his face. "Time to move," he said. "Ryder passed close by 20 minutes ago. Didn't spot us, but he was moving with purpose, and purpose this early usually means somebody's organizing a proper search." Emma was on her feet instantly. The exhaustion of the night before burned away by fresh adrenaline. Barlow's men, almost certainly. We push hard today. We might reach Pueblo by tomorrow evening instead of the day after. Every hour we're not moving is an hour they're closing ground. They saddled the horse in tense silence, and within minutes were riding hard away from the shack, the pale light of early morning stretching long shadows across the broken land ahead of them. Emma held on tight, her mind racing through everything that had happened in the last 2 days. The family she'd lost, the stranger who'd become the only solid thing in a world gone suddenly chaotic and dangerous. They rode for nearly 3 hours before Noah suddenly reined the horse to a sharp stop, his whole body going rigid with alarm. "What is it?" Emma asked, fear spiking instantly at his reaction. Noah didn't answer right away, his eyes fixed on something in the distance that Emma couldn't yet make out. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard from him before. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. "That's not a patrol," he said slowly. "That's Barlow himself, and he's not alone." Emma followed his gaze and finally saw it, a large group of riders, easily 15 or 20 strong, moving across the open plain ahead of them, cutting directly across the path they needed to take toward Pueblo. "How do you know it's him?" "I know his horse. Big black gelding, distinctive white sock on the foreleg. I'd know that animal anywhere." Noah's jaw tightened. "He's brought the whole operation out here, which means whatever patience he had for hunting me quiet and careful, he's run clean out of it. What do we do? We can't get past that many men." "No," Noah agreed grimly. "We can't, which means we're not going around them. We're going to have to find another way to Pueblo, entirely longer, rougher, but far enough from the main trail that even Barlow's numbers won't be enough to cover all of it." "How much longer?" "A full day, maybe more. Through canyon country that'll test this horse worse than anything we've faced yet." He glanced back at her, something apologetic in his expression. "I won't lie to you, Emma. What's ahead is going to be harder than everything behind us combined." Emma looked out at the small army of riders in the distance, at the sheer overwhelming scale of the danger they now faced, and felt something inside her that should have been fear, but instead settled into a hard, determined resolve. "Then we survive it," she said. "Same as we've survived everything else." Noah studied her for a long moment, something like genuine admiration breaking through the tension on his face. "You know," he said, "when I found you by that trunk, I figured I was rescuing a scared girl who'd need carrying most of the way to safety. And now I'm starting to think I found somebody who might just carry herself given half a chance." He turned the horse toward the canyon country, rising rough and forbidding on the horizon. "Let's find out." They rode hard toward the broken land ahead, the distant shape of Barlow's small army fading slowly behind them, and Emma understood with growing certainty that whatever waited in that canyon country would test them both in ways the last 2 days hadn't even begun to approach. The gunfire, the chase, the war for survival that Noah had promised was coming. All of it was still ahead of them, closer now than ever, and there would be no more rivers or rock slides to buy them easy mercy. The real fight hadn't even started yet. The canyon walls rose sharp and jagged on either side as Noah pushed the horse into the broken country, and Emma felt the change in the air, immediately cooler, closed, in every sound bouncing off stone, in ways that made distances impossible to judge. "Stay low," Noah said. "Voices carry strange in canyon country. Sound like it's coming from one direction, it's really coming from another. Don't trust your ears out here, trust mine." "How do you even know your way through this?" "Scouted it 3 summers back, chasing strays that wandered off from a herd I was minding. Man doesn't forget ground like this once he's learned it. Every wrong turn in a canyon can dead-end you into a box with rock on 3 sides and nowhere left to run." Emma's stomach tightened at the image. "And if we hit a dead end with Barlow's men behind us, then we don't hit one. That's why you let me lead." They rode deeper, the trail narrowing until the horse's shoulders nearly brushed stone on either side, and Emma found herself holding her breath without meaning to, as if the canyon itself might notice them and decide to close in tighter. The light dimmed as the walls climbed higher, cutting the sky down to a thin ribbon far above. And somewhere in that narrow strip of blue, a hawk circled, screaming once before wheeling away. "That's not a good sign," Noah murmured. "What isn't?" "A hawk like that calling out over open riders sometimes means something's disturbed below it. Could be nothing. Could be somebody's already ahead of us in this canyon." He slowed the horse, listening hard, every muscle in his body coiled tight. "Stay quiet a second." Emma held perfectly still, straining her ears against the silence, and for a long, breathless moment, there was nothing but wind moving through rock and the horse's own breathing beneath them. Then she heard it, a voice, faint, distant, but unmistakably human, echoing strangely off the canyon walls in a way that made it impossible to tell if it came from ahead or behind. "Someone's here," she whispered. "I heard it." Noah's hand moved instinctively to his rifle. Could be Barlow's men found another route in. Could be somebody else entirely, a rancher, a drifter, none of Barlow's concern at all. Either way, we don't take chances. He guided the horse off the main trail into a narrow side channel Emma hadn't even noticed was there, walls close enough on both sides that she could have reached out and touched stone with either hand. They moved slow now, careful every hoofbeat muffled deliberately against loose gravel. The voice came again, closer this time, and with it unmistakably the jingle of a bridle and the creak of saddle leather. Riders. Close. Noah brought the horse to a complete stop, sliding down silently and pressing a finger to his lips before helping Emma down as well. He led the horse into a shallow recess in the canyon wall, barely large enough to conceal them, and pressed his back against the stone rifle, ready, eyes fixed on the mouth of the side channel. Emma's heart hammered so loud she was certain it could be heard from 20 feet away. She pressed herself against the cold stone beside Noah, and for a long, agonizing stretch of time, neither of them moved, neither of them breathed louder than absolutely necessary, while the sound of riders grew closer, then paused, then mercifully began to fade as the group moved on past the mouth of the channel without ever slowing. Noah didn't relax until the sound had disappeared entirely into the canyon's echoing distance. "That was 3 men," he said quietly. "Not Barlow's main group, too small a party. Scouts probably working ahead of the main body to flush us out if we tried hiding in exactly this kind of ground. They almost found us." "Almost isn't found." He checked the horse, running a steadying hand along its neck. "But it tells me something important. Barlow spread his men wide, working this canyon in sections instead of one big sweep. That means we can't count on any one stretch of ground staying clear for long. We move fast and we move smart, or we run out of luck eventually." They pressed on through the side channel, Noah navigating by some internal map. Emma still couldn't begin to follow, and after nearly an hour of careful, silent progress, the walls finally began to widen again, opening into a broader stretch of canyon where sunlight reached the ground in patches instead of thin slivers. "We're close to the far end," Noah said, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. "Another mile, maybe 2, and we're back onto open ground, clear path toward Pueblo from there." Relief flooded through Emma's chest, warm and immediate, and then without warning, a rifle shot cracked through the canyon, the sound bouncing violently off stone walls until it seemed to come from every direction at once. The horse reared in panic, and Emma screamed as she nearly lost her grip entirely. Only Noah's quick hand catching her arm and steadying her before she could fall. "Down," Noah shouted. "Get down now." They scrambled off the horse together, Noah pulling Emma behind a jumble of fallen rock as a second shot rang out closer. This time, chips of stone sprang from the canyon wall just feet from where they'd been standing moments before. "They found us," Emma gasped. "They found us," Noah confirmed grimly, already scanning the canyon rim above for the source of the gunfire. "Up there, ridgeline maybe 200 yards. Somebody's got a rifle and a clear line down into the canyon. What do we do? We move, and we move now before they get the range dialed in proper." Noah grabbed the horse's reins, keeping the animal low and using the rock formation as cover. "There's a bend ahead, maybe 50 yards. Gets us out of his sight line entirely. We run for it on my mark." Another shot cracked out, and Emma flinched hard, pressing herself tighter against the rock. "Now!" Noah shouted, and they broke from cover together, sprinting hard across open ground with the horse pulled along behind them, and Emma's lungs burned as she ran every step, feeling like it might be the one where the rifle finally found its mark. They reached the bend and threw themselves around it just as another shot rang out, striking rock somewhere behind them And then blessedly, they were out of the shooter's line of sight, entirely both of them gasping for breath against the canyon wall. That's twice now, Emma managed between breaths. Twice I've had a rifle aimed at me in 2 days. Third time's not happening, Noah said, checking his own rifle with quick, practiced hands. Not on my watch. What do we do about the shooter? We don't fight him, we outrun him. He's got position, but position only matters if we stay in his sightline, and we don't intend to. Noah swung back up into the saddle and pulled Emma up behind him with the same practiced ease as before. Hold tight. Rest of this canyon we ride hard, and we don't stop till we're clear. They pushed the horse into a hard run, weaving through the widening canyon floor, and Emma held on with everything she had, feeling the animal's exhaustion in every labored breath, knowing there was no choice but to ask more of it anyway. The canyon finally opened onto flat ground, and Noah didn't slow, pushing them hard across open plain for another mile before finally easing the horse back to a walk, both of them scanning behind for any sign of pursuit. I think we're clear, Noah said finally, though the tension in his voice suggested he didn't fully believe it himself. You think, out here thinking's the best certainty a man gets most days. He glanced back at her, something searching in his expression. You all right? Emma realized her hands were shaking, adrenaline still coursing hard through her veins. I don't know what all right even means anymore. I've been shot at, twice chased by outlaws, nearly drowned in a river, and it's not even been 2 full days. I know it's a lot, Noah said, and something gentler entered his voice. More than any one person should have to carry all at once. You're doing better than most grown men I've served alongside would do faced with the same. Doesn't feel like it. Feeling strong and being strong aren't the same thing, Noah said. You're proving the second one over and over, whether you feel it or not. They rode on the plain, stretching wide and open before them, Pueblo somewhere still ahead beyond the horizon, and for a while, blessedly, nothing pursued them at all. Emma allowed herself to breathe, to let some of the terror drain out of her body, to notice things beyond immediate survival. The warmth of the afternoon sun, the steady rhythm of the horse's gait, the solid, reassuring presence of the man in front of her. Noah, she said after a while, can I ask you something else? Seems to be your favorite pastime. Not much else to do on a horse for hours at a time. She felt him huff something like a laugh. What happens after Pueblo? If we make it there safe, if you report what you know about Barlow, what happens to you then? Depends how the marshal handles it. If he moves fast, gathers enough evidence, maybe Barlow's operation gets shut down for good, and I go back to scouting and running cattle same as before. He paused. If it moves slow, or if Barlow's got friends in places that matter, could be, I spend a good while looking over my shoulder regardless of what happens in Pueblo. That doesn't sound like much of a life. It's the life I've got, Noah said simply. Man doesn't always get to choose the shape of the road ahead of him. He just chooses how he walks it. Emma considered this, considered everything she'd learned about him in less than 2 days, the hard edges shaped by war and loss, the quiet code he lived by, the gentleness he tried to hide beneath practicality and grim honesty. I think, she said slowly, that you walk it better than you give yourself credit for. Noah didn't answer right away, and when he finally did, his voice carried something rougher than usual. Something that told her the words had landed somewhere deep. That's kind of you to say. It's not kindness, it's just true. You said yourself you deal in true things. The moment stretched between them, warm despite the exhaustion and danger surrounding it, until the horse suddenly tensed beneath them, ears pricking forward, and Noah's whole body went instantly alert. What is it? Emma whispered. Don't know yet. He scanned the horizon carefully. Horse senses something before I do most times. Trust her instincts as much as mine. They rode forward cautiously, and within minutes, the source of the horse's alarm became clear, smoke rising thin and black against the sky from somewhere not far ahead. That's not a cook fire, Noah said grimly. That's something burning bigger than that. Could it be Barlow's men? Could be. Or could be something else entirely. A homestead in trouble. A wagon fire. Any number of things out here that end in smoke like that. He hesitated, clearly weighing the risk of investigating against the risk of riding blind past a threat they didn't understand. We need to know what we're dealing with before we get closer. Can't afford surprises, not with everything already stacked against us. They approached carefully, staying low, using what cover the open land offered, until finally the source of the smoke came into view, a small homestead where its barn engulfed in flame, figures moving frantically around it, trying to save what they could. That's not Barlow's men, Noah said, relief evident in his voice. That's just bad luck. Fire like that probably started from a stove spark or a lightning strike. Nothing to do with our trouble at all. Shouldn't we help them? Noah hesitated, torn between two competing instincts. Emma could see warring plainly across his face the instinct to keep moving, to keep her safe, to not risk further delay with Barlow's men somewhere behind them, against something deeper. Some code he clearly lived by that made riding past suffering, without helping, feel like its own kind of betrayal. We can spare a few minutes, he said finally. Barnes likely lost already, but there might be something worth saving, and every extra hand matters when a fire's got that kind of hold. They rode down to the homestead, and the family there, a weathered farmer, his wife, 2 children, no older than 10, looked up with startled, wary eyes at the sight of strangers approaching before Noah's calm, steady presence. An immediate offer of help eased their suspicion. For the better part of 20 minutes, Noah worked alongside the farmer, hauling water, beating back flames that threatened to spread beyond the barn to the house itself, while Emma helped the farmer's wife move what livestock could still be saved to safer ground. The work was hard and hot and exhausting, but there was something clarifying in it too. Something that reminded Emma that the world contained more than just the danger chasing them. It contained ordinary people fighting ordinary disasters, needing help, same as she had needed it 2 mornings before. By the time the fire finally burned itself down to smoldering ruin, the barn was lost, but the house stood safe, and the farmer gripped Noah's hand with fierce, grateful intensity. "Don't know how to thank you proper," the man said. "Strangers don't usually stop for folks they don't know." "Man stopped for me once when I needed it," Noah said, and Emma caught the brief glance he sent her way. Seemed only right to pass it along. The farmer's wife pressed a small bundle of food into Emma's hands before they left, insisting. Despite Emma's protests, and as they rode away from the smoldering homestead, Emma found herself turning the exchange over in her mind, something warm settling into her chest, despite everything else weighing on her. "You didn't have to stop," she said, "not with everything chasing us." "No." Noah agreed, but some things matter more than the danger behind you. That's a lesson I learned the hard way more than once. They rode on as afternoon stretched toward evening, and the closer they came to Pueblo, the more Emma allowed herself to hope, cautiously, carefully aware of how quickly hope had been shattered. Before that, the worst of the danger might finally be behind them. That hope lasted less than an hour. "Riders," Noah said suddenly, a voice dropping low and urgent. "Ahead, not behind, cutting across our path." Emma's heart plummeted. How many? Too many. Noah's jaw tightened as he studied the distant riders, and Emma watched his expression shift from wariness to something closer to alarm. "That's Barlow's main group. They've circled around ahead of us, somehow cut off our straight path to Pueblo entirely." "How is that possible? We lost them in the canyon." "Man knows this territory near as well as I do, evidently. Or he guessed our destination and rode to intercept instead of chase." Noah's eyes swept the landscape, searching for options, and Emma could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, weighing paths, weighing risks. "We can't go around them without adding hours we don't have. Can't go through them without a fight neither one of us wants." "So what do we do?" Noah was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight Emma hadn't heard from him before, something that sounded almost like resignation mixed with fierce determination. "There's a rock formation about a half-mile that way," he said, pointing toward a cluster of boulders rising from the flat land like broken teeth. "Good cover, defensible position. If they've spotted us already, and I have to assume they have, running won't save us. We need ground that lets me hold them off long enough for something to change in our favor." "You mean fight them?" "Fight. I mean survive long enough to see another option open up," Noah said. "I won't lie to you, Emma. This is the moment I was hoping we'd avoid. But hoping doesn't change what's in front of us now." Emma felt fear rise up hard and fast, but beneath it, something steadier held firm, the same resolve that had carried her through the wolves, the river, the canyon ambush. "Then we survive it," she said, "same as everything else." Noah spurred the horse hard toward the rock formation, and behind them distant shouts rose up as Barlow's men spotted the movement and gave chase, hooves thundering across the open plain in pursuit. Emma held on tight, her heart pounding in rhythm with the horse's desperate gallop, watching the rocks grow closer with agonizing slowness, while the shouts behind them grew louder, closer, more numerous than she wanted to count. They reached the formation just as the first riders closed to within rifle range, and Noah pulled the horse into a narrow gap between two large boulders, sliding down and pulling Emma with him, pressing her back against solid stone. "Stay down," he said, already moving to a defensive position with rifle raised. "Whatever happens, stay behind this rock." The first shots came fast and hard, chips of stone exploding around them as Barlow's men opened fire from horseback, and Noah returned fire with grim, methodical precision, each shot placed with the same careful economy he brought to everything else. "How many are there?" Emma shouted over the gunfire. "Enough that this isn't going to be quick," Noah shouted back, reloading with practiced speed. "But this position holds. Rock's thick enough to stop their rounds, and they can't rush us more than two at a time through this gap." The gunfire intensified, and Emma pressed herself as small as possible against the stone terror, clawing through her chest with every crack of rifle fire, every shout from the men circling them. Noah fought with a controlled fury that both frightened and reassured her. Every shot deliberate, every movement calculated to conserve ammunition and maximize whatever advantage the terrain offered them. A shout of pain rose from beyond the rocks. One of Barlow's men hit, and for a moment the gunfire faltered, riders pulling back to regroup out of range. "That's one," Noah said grimly, though there was no satisfaction in his voice, only the flat calculation of a man doing what needed doing to survive. "They'll come again harder next time. This is just them testing our position." "How long can we hold out?" "Long as the ammunition lasts and long as they don't think to flank us from a different angle." Noah's eyes swept the surrounding rocks, searching for weaknesses in their defense. "That's the real danger. This position's strong from the front, not as strong if they find a way around behind us." As if his words had summoned it, movement flickered at the edge of Emma's vision, a rider circling wide around the formation, clearly attempting exactly the flanking maneuver Noah had feared. "Noah," she shouted, pointing. He spun, tracking the movement, and fired a single shot that sent the flanking rider diving for cover, horse-rearing in panic. "Good eye," he said. "Keep watching that side. I'll cover the front." For the next several minutes, the battle settled into a tense, grinding rhythm. Barlow's men probing for weaknesses, testing angles, occasionally rushing closer, only to be driven back by Noah's precise, unforgiving fire, while Emma watched the flanks, calling out movement, feeling herself become, however small, an active participant in their survival, rather than simply a passenger being protected. Then, during a brief lull, a new voice rose up from beyond the rocks, cold, confident, carrying easily across the open ground. "Tanner," the voice called out, "you know this doesn't end well for you. Give us the girl and maybe we let you ride off clean. Keep hiding her and we finish this the hard way." Emma's blood ran cold. "That's Barlow," she whispered. "He's here himself." Noah's face hardened into something Emma hadn't seen from him before, pure, controlled rage held tightly in check. "He's here," he confirmed, "which means he's decided this is worth ending personally instead of leaving it to his men." "What do we do?" "We don't negotiate," Noah said flatly. "Man like Barlow doesn't keep promises. Handing you over buys nothing but 2 deaths instead of a fighting chance at 1 survival." He raised his voice, calling back across the rocks. "She's got nothing to do with your business, Barlow. Let her go and you and me settle this the old way, man to man. Your men stand down." A cold laugh answered him. "You always did have a soft spot for lost causes, Tanner, but I didn't get where I am playing fair fights. Boys take the rocks." The gunfire erupted again, fiercer than before, and Emma understood with sudden terrible clarity that whatever brief respite they'd found was over. That the real fight, the one that would decide everything, had only just begun. Noah fired back with renewed intensity, and Emma pressed herself against the stone, watching him fight for both their lives with an intensity that was equal parts terrifying and awe-inspiring. And somewhere in the chaos of gunfire and shouting and dust, she found herself praying with everything she had that this hard, weathered stranger who had become the only solid thing in her shattered world would somehow impossibly find a way for them both to survive what was coming. The battle raged on, and neither side showed any sign of yielding. The rocks around them exploded in chips of stone as the gunfire intensified, and Emma pressed her hands over her ears without meaning to the sound so constant now, it had stopped registering as individual shots and become one continuous roar. "They're pushing in from 3 says," Noah shouted, reloading with hands that moved fast but never fumbled. "Barlow wants this finished before dark." That works against us and for us both. How does that work for us? Desperate men make mistakes. Barlow's rushing this because he doesn't want witnesses or word getting back to Pueblo before he's cleaned up his loose ends. Rushing means sloppy, and sloppy means opportunity if we're patient enough to wait for it. A rider broke from cover, charging the gap between the boulders, and Noah's rifle cracked at once, sending the man tumbling from his saddle before he'd covered half the distance. The horse bolted riderless across the plain, and for a moment the gunfire actually paused, as if even Barlow's men needed a breath to absorb what they'd just watched. "That's two?" Noah said, voice flat, no triumph in it, only grim arithmetic. "How many were there to start?" "Counted close to 15 when we first spotted them. Take away the one from the river, the two here." He stopped himself. "Enough left that counting them off one at a time isn't a strategy. It's just delay." Emma's hands were shaking, but she forced herself to keep watching the flank. Noah had assigned her scanning the rocks and scrub for any hint of movement. "There," she shouted suddenly, spotting a shape creeping low along a ridge to their left. "Someone's climbing up there." Noah spun, tracking her pointing finger, and fired twice in rapid succession. The climbing figure dropped flat against the rock, and Noah cursed under his breath. Missed him. He's got cover now, working around to come at us from above. What does that mean? Means he could get an angle down into this gap that no amount of rock is going to stop. Noah's jaw tightened, calculating fast. "I need to move, get eyes on him before he gets settled. You stay here, stay low, don't move from this spot no matter what." "Noah, don't. I'll be 20 feet away, I'm not leaving you. But I can't let that man find his shot either." He gripped her shoulder for one brief, steadying second. "Trust me." "I do," Emma said, and meant it with a completeness that surprised her even as fear clawed at her throat. Noah moved low and fast along the base of the rocks, and Emma watched him go, with her heart in her mouth, tracking the ridge above for any sign of the climbing gunman. Long seconds crawled by, the gunfire from the front temporarily suppressed as Barlow's remaining men reassessed their approach, and then a single shot rang out from Noah's new position, followed by a sharp cry from above and the clatter of a rifle falling against rock. "Got him!" Noah called back, already moving to return to her side. Relief flooded through Emma so hard her knees nearly buckled, and she pressed herself against the boulder, forcing air back into lungs that had forgotten how to breathe properly for the last several seconds. Noah dropped back into position beside her, breathing hard but steady. That should slow the rest of them down some. Losing a man to a flanking position they thought was safe, that'll make them think twice before trying it again. "How many is that now?" "3. Noah's expression was grim. "Still more than enough left to finish this if Barlow's willing to keep spending them." As if summoned by the words, Barlow's voice rose again from beyond the rocks, harder now, edged with real anger. "You're costing me, Goodman Tanner. This ends now." "Then come finish it yourself," Noah shouted back. "Or is hiding behind other men's bodies the only kind of finishing you know how to do?" The taunt landed exactly as Noah intended. Emma could hear the fury in the silence that followed the wounded pride of a man used to being feared rather than mocked. When Barlow's voice came again, it had lost some of its cold control. "You think you're clever, Tanner. You think that girl's worth dying for. I think you're a coward who steals cattle and hides behind hired guns," Noah shot back. "And I think every man riding with you today is risking his neck for a debt that isn't even his to collect." A long pause. Then unexpectedly, a new voice called out, younger, uncertain, clearly one of Barlow's remaining riders rather than Barlow himself. "Boss, this ain't worth it. We've lost 3 men over some grudge that ain't even ours." "Shut your mouth and hold position," Barlow snapped, but the crack in his authority was audible, even from behind the rocks, and Emma felt a flicker of something like hope kindle in her chest. "His men are wavering," she whispered. "Maybe." Noah kept his rifle steady, watching the rocks ahead. "Doesn't mean Barlow's done. Man like that cornered and losing control of his own crew, that's when he gets most dangerous, not least." The gunfire resumed, but with less coordination, now shots coming sporadic and uncertain, rather than the disciplined volleys from before. Noah used the confusion to his advantage, picking his shots with careful precision, and Emma watched 2 more of Barlow's riders break away entirely, spurring their horses back across the plain in open retreat. "They're running," Emma said, disbelief coloring her voice. "Some of them," Noah confirmed. "Not all. Barlow's not the type to let go easy, and he's got at least a handful still loyal enough, or scared enough to keep fighting. The remaining gunfire intensified again, and Emma flinched hard as a round struck the rock inches from her head, spraying stone chips against her cheek hard enough to draw blood. She cried out, pressing a hand to the sting, and Noah was at her side, instantly checking the wound with fast, urgent hands. "It's just a graze," he said, relief evident even through the tension. "You're all right. Stay down lower, though. That shot came too close." "I'm fine," Emma said, though her voice shook. "Keep fighting. I'm fine." Noah hesitated one more second, torn between tending to her and returning fire before a fresh volley from beyond the rocks forced his hand, and he spun back to the defense with renewed focused fury, as if the near miss on Emma had stripped away whatever restraint he'd been fighting with before. His return fire came faster now, more relentless, and within minutes another cry of pain rose from beyond the rocks, followed by the unmistakable sound of a body hitting the ground. "4," Noah said, voice tight. Barlow's voice rose again, but this time it carried something new beneath the anger, the first thin edge of genuine desperation. "You're not walking away from this, Tanner. I'll burn every ranch between here and Pueblo before I let you reach that marshal." "Then you'll hang for a lot more than cattle theft," Noah called back. "Arson and murder on top of everything else, that's a rope waiting for you, no matter how this ends today." The exchange seemed to rattle something loose in the remaining attackers, because the gunfire that followed came scattered and hesitant, more posture than genuine assault, and Emma began to sense cautiously that the tide of the fight had shifted in some fundamental way she didn't yet fully understand. Then everything changed at once. A new sound cut through the gunfire hoofbeats, many of them approaching fast, from the direction of Pueblo rather than from Barlow's position. Noah's head snapped up, alert and wary, uncertain whether this represented new danger or unexpected rescue. "What is that?" Emma asked. "Don't know yet." Noah's rifle stayed trained on the approaching sound, ready for either possibility. "Stay down." The hoofbeats grew louder, and then a shout rang out, an authoritative, commanding voice Emma had never heard before. "This is Marshal Cole Whitmore, Territorial Law. Drop your weapons, all of you, now." Emma's breath caught. "The Marshal? How?" "Don't know," Noah said, disbelief coloring his voice. "But I'm not questioning it." A fresh volley of shouting and confusion erupted from Barlow's remaining position, and through the gaps in the rocks, Emma glimpsed a dozen riders sweeping in from the Pueblo, direction badges glinting on several chests, rifles raised and ready. Barlow's remaining men, already thinned and demoralized, scattered in every direction, rather than face this new overwhelming force. "Barlow," the marshal's voice rang out again. "You're done. Surrender now, or we finish this the hard way." There was a long, tense pause, and then unexpectedly, the sound of a single horse breaking away at a full gallop, fleeing east across the open plain, rather than surrendering. "He's running," Noah said, watching through a gap in the rocks. "Cowards running rather than face what's coming. Should we stop him?" "That's the marshal's job now, not ours." Noah finally lowered his rifle, some of the fierce tension in his body easing for the first time in what felt like hours. "Wait here. I need to see what brought a marshal's posse out this far this fast." He rose cautiously from behind the rocks, hands visible, calling out his own name before the approaching riders could mistake him for one of Barlow's men. Emma watched, still trembling, as a broad-shouldered man with a marshal's star rode forward, studying Noah with sharp, assessing eyes. "Noah Tanner," the marshal said. "Didn't expect to find you in the middle of a gunfight 2 days before you were due in my office." "Wasn't exactly planned, Marshal Whitmore." Noah's voice carried unmistakable relief. "How'd you know to come out here?" "Rancher named Whitfield sent word 3 days back, said a scout of his had stumbled onto evidence of Barlow's rustling operation and was planning to bring it to Pueblo personal. When word reached me that Barlow's whole crew had ridden out armed and angry, wasn't hard to put together what was happening." The marshal's eyes shifted past Noah to where Emma still crouched behind the rocks. "And who might this be?" "Emma Morgan," Noah said. "Got separated from her family's wagon train 2 days back. Barlow's men made her collateral in this mess entirely by accident." The marshal's expression softened slightly as he studied Emma, taking in the dried blood on her cheek, the exhaustion written plain across her face. "Ma'am, you've had quite an ordeal from the look of things." "You have no idea," Emma said, and something in the sheer relief of the moment finally broke loose inside her, tears spilling over before she could stop them. Noah moved to her side immediately, and though he didn't quite know how to offer comfort, His presence alone seemed to steady her, one hand resting careful and warm against her shoulder. "It's over," he said quietly. "You're safe now, truly safe, not just for now." Emma nodded, unable to speak, past the tightness in her throat, and allowed herself finally to simply feel the relief of survival, without the immediate need to fight for the next breath, the next mile, the next desperate escape. The marshal dismounted, surveying the aftermath of the battle with a grim professional eye, noting the bodies of Barlow's fallen men, with the weary acceptance of a man long accustomed to violence in this territory. "We'll need a full accounting from both of you," he said, "but it can wait until we're back in Pueblo somewhere safer than open ground with Barlow still loose out there somewhere." "He can't have gotten far," Noah said. "Horse looked tired even before he broke and ran." "My men will run him down before dark," the marshal said with quiet confidence. "Man like Barlow doesn't have many places left to hide once his own crew starts scattering. Desperation makes him careless, and careless men in open territory don't stay free long." As if to punctuate his words, one of the marshal's riders called out from a distance, gesturing urgently toward the eastern horizon. Whitmore's head snapped up, and he squinted into the distance before a grim, satisfied expression crossed his weathered face. "Looks like your patience just paid off," he said to Noah. "That's my deputy signaling. Means they've spotted him." Within 20 minutes, two of the marshal's men returned, flanking a sullen, disarmed rider. Between them, a heavy-set man with cold eyes and an expression twisted somewhere between fury and disbelief, clearly unaccustomed to finding himself on the losing end of any confrontation. "Barlow," Noah said, and there was no triumph in his voice, only a flat, exhausted finality. Barlow's eyes found Noah across the distance, burning with hatred, even in defeat. "This isn't finished, Tanner," he spat. "You think a badge and some evidence changes anything? I've got friends in places that matter more than some territorial marshal's office." "Maybe," Marshal Whitmore said calmly, cutting in before Noah could respond. "Or maybe a federal judge in Denver takes a real interest in rustling operations that span 3 counties once he's got sworn testimony and hard evidence in front of him, instead of rumors he can wave away. We'll find out together, won't we?" Barlow's face darkened further, but he said nothing more, and the deputies led him away toward the rest of the mounted posse, his silence somehow more menacing than any further threats might have been. Marshal Whitmore turned back to Noah and Emma, his expression easing into something more businesslike, now that the immediate danger had passed. "We'll escort you both back to Pueblo," he said. "You'll need to give full statements, and Miss Morgan should want to send word out about your family through every station along the wagon routes. Someone's bound to have news, one way or another." "Thank you, Marshal," Emma said, her voice still unsteady, but steadier than it had been minutes before. "Don't thank me yet," Whitmore said, not unkindly. "Plenty of paperwork and questions ahead before this is properly finished. But you're alive, and that's the part that matters most today." They mounted up, Noah helping Emma onto the horse behind him, with the same careful, practiced ease as every time before, though something in the gesture felt different now, less like an act of necessity, and more like something else entirely, something neither of them had quite named yet. As the posse began to ride toward Pueblo, Marshal Whitmore fell into pace beside Noah, studying him with a curious, appraising expression. "You did good work here today, Tanner. Killing 3 of Barlow's men holding this position against those odds takes a particular kind of nerve most folks don't have." "Didn't have much choice," Noah said. "Wasn't about to let them take her." "No," Whitmore agreed, glancing back at Emma with a knowing look he didn't bother hiding. "I don't imagine you were." Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks at the marshal's implication, and she caught Noah's shoulders tensing slightly in front of her, though he said nothing in response, simply kept the horse moving, steady toward the horizon where Pueblo waited somewhere beyond. They rode for the better part of 2 hours before the first signs of civilization began to appear. Fence lines, cultivated fields, the distant shapes of buildings rising against the darkening sky. Emma felt something in her chest loosen at the sight, a tension she hadn't fully realized she'd been carrying since the moment she turned around and found the wagon train gone. "Almost there," Noah said, as if sensing her thoughts. "Few more miles." "I still can't quite believe it," Emma admitted. 2 days ago, I was sitting by a broken trunk, certain I was going to die out there alone. Now we're riding into an actual town with law and buildings and—" She stopped, overwhelmed suddenly by how much had changed in such a short span of time. "A lot's happened," Noah agreed quietly. "More than either of us expected when I found you that morning." "Do you regret it?" Emma asked. "Any of it?" The danger, the men you had to fight, everything this cost you. Noah was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the same careful honesty he brought to everything. No, he said finally. Cost was high, I won't pretend otherwise. But I'd pay it again exactly the same, given the choice. Some things are worth the cost, whatever that cost turns out to be. Emma didn't trust herself to respond to that right away. The weight of his words settling into her chest alongside everything else the day had given her the fear, the violence, the relief, and now this something warmer and more complicated that she wasn't yet ready to name. The outskirts of Pueblo grew closer, lamplight beginning to flicker on in windows as evening settled fully over the land, and Emma found herself studying the town ahead with a strange, disorienting mixture of relief and uncertainty. This was supposed to be safety, the destination Noah had promised from the very first morning. But safety, she was beginning to understand, didn't erase everything that had happened to get here. It simply gave her space, finally, to feel the full weight of it. Noah, she said softly, what happens to us now? Once we're in Pueblo, once the statements are given and the marshal has what he needs, what happens then? The question hung in the air between them, heavier than either of them had probably intended, and Noah didn't answer right away, his silence stretching long enough that Emma began to wonder if she'd overstepped some boundary neither of them had discussed. I don't rightly know, he said, finally honest as always. Suppose that depends on a few things, whether your family's found, whether Pueblo's got used for a scout who just helped bring down one of the territory's worst outlaws, whether he stopped himself and Emma felt him tense slightly in front of her. Whether what? Whether you'd want anything more to do with a man who's brought you nothing but danger since the moment you met him, Noah said quietly, and there was something unguarded in his voice now, something that told Emma this admission cost him more than any of the physical danger they'd faced together. Emma considered her answer carefully, aware of the weight this moment carried, aware that whatever she said next might shape everything that came after. You didn't bring me danger, Noah, she said finally. The danger was already there waiting for me the moment those wagons disappeared over that horizon. You brought me something else entirely. You brought me a reason to keep fighting instead of giving up. Noah was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice had roughened with something Emma hadn't heard from him before. That might be the kindest thing anyone said to me in longer than I care to admit. It's not kindness, Emma said, echoing words she'd offered him once before. It's just true. The lights of Pueblo grew brighter ahead of them, and Marshal Whitmore's posse began to spread out slightly as they approached the town's edge, some peeling off toward the jail with Barlow in custody, others continuing on toward the marshal's office, where statements would need to be given. This is it. Noah said, something almost reluctant in his voice, as if he wasn't quite ready for the strange, dangerous intimacy of the last 2 days to give way to something more ordinary. Pueblo, safety same as I promised you back on that trail. Emma looked out at the town-ahead buildings and lamplight, and the distant sound of ordinary life continuing, unaware of everything that had happened to bring them here, and she felt a complicated tangle of emotions rise up in her chest. Relief certainly, exhaustion deep and bone-tired, but beneath all of it, something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with safety, and everything to do with the man whose waist she still held on to, whose voice had somehow become in less than 2 days the single most steadying thing in her entire shattered world. Noah, she said as they crossed the final stretch toward the town's edge. Yeah. Whatever happens next with my family, with Barlow, with the marshal and all of it, I want you to know something. She paused, gathering courage she hadn't known she still had after everything the day had taken from her. I'm glad it was you. Out of everyone who could have found me that morning, I'm glad it was you. Noah's hand found hers where it rested against his side, squeezing once gentle and sure. So am I, he said quietly, more than I know how to properly say. They rode into Pueblo together as full dark settled over the territory behind them, the danger of the open trail finally truly behind them, and ahead, uncertain, unwritten, full of questions neither of them had yet found the courage to fully ask, waited whatever came next. The marshal's office stood lit and waiting at the edge of the town square, and as they drew the horse to a stop before it, Emma felt the full weight of everything that had happened finally begin to settle over her, not as a burden, but as something closer to the foundation of whoever she was about to become. The wagon train was gone. Her old life was gone. But something new had begun in its place, forged in fire and gun smoke, and the steady, unshakable presence of a man who had stopped when so many others might have ridden past. Noah slid down from the horse and reached up to help her down, and as her feet touched solid ground in the heart of Pueblo, for the first time Emma understood with a certainty that surprised her that whatever waited inside that marshal's office, questions, statements, uncertain news about her family, she was no longer facing it as the frightened, abandoned girl who had knelt beside a broken trunk 2 mornings before. She was facing it as someone entirely new, someone who had survived wolves and rivers and gunfire and betrayal, and who had found in the middle of all that danger something she hadn't even known she was looking for. "Ready?" Noah asked, offering his arm toward the office door. Emma took a steadying breath, looked back once at the dark trail stretching away behind them into the territory that had nearly killed her and had somehow impossibly also given her this, and then she looked forward toward the lit windows and the uncertain future waiting inside. "Ready," she said, and together they walked through the door. The office smelled of wood smoke and old paper, and Marshal Whitmore was already seated behind his desk when they entered, a deputy pouring coffee into 3 tin cups without being asked. "Sit," Whitmore said, gesturing to 2 worn chairs across from his desk. "Long night ahead of us, might as well be comfortable while we do it." Emma sank into the chair, her whole body finally registering the exhaustion she'd been out running for 2 days straight. Noah remained standing a moment longer, scanning the room out of old habit, before finally lowering himself into the seat beside her. "Statement first," Whitmore said, pulling out a ledger and dipping his pen. "Tanner, start from the beginning. Everything you saw of Barlow's operation, everything that happened out there today. Leave nothing out. A federal judge is going to want this account word for word." Noah spoke for the better part of an hour, methodical and precise, laying out details of altered brands and forged bills of sale, names of buyers 3 counties over, dates and locations he'd apparently been quietly recording in his head for months. Emma listened, understanding for the first time the true scope of what Noah had stumbled into, how much danger he'd been carrying long before he'd ever found her beside that broken trunk. When he finished, Whitmore set down his pen and studied him with something like genuine respect. "This is more than enough to see Barlow hang, assuming the judge moves fast and Barlow's friends don't move faster. You've done this territory a real service, Tanner, whether you feel much like celebrating it tonight or not." "Wasn't looking for thanks," Noah said. "Just wanted it finished." "Well, it's close to finished now." Whitmore turned his attention to Emma, his voice gentling. "Miss Morgan, I know you've had about as hard a 2 days as a person can have, but I need your account too for the record, and then we'll turn our attention to finding your family." Emma told her story, and saying it aloud for the first time made the whole ordeal feel strangely distant, like something that had happened to another girl entirely. The water bucket, the empty horizon, the broken trunk, the wolves circling in the dark. When she reached the part where Noah had appeared on the horizon, her voice caught, and she found herself glancing at him before she could stop herself. "He saved my life," she said simply. "More than once. I wouldn't be sitting here without him." Whitmore nodded, writing it all down without comment, though the look he exchanged with his deputy suggested he'd drawn his own conclusions about the nature of what had passed between them out on that trail. "As for your family," Whitmore said, setting down his pen, "I'll have wires sent out first thing tomorrow to every station along the main trail roads. Wagon trains that size don't move invisible. Somebody along the way will have seen them, taken note of names, maybe even taken in word of a missing girl if anyone thought to ask after you." "Thank you, Marshal," Emma said, though a fresh wave of anxiety rose in her chest at the mention of her family, hope and fear tangled together so tightly she could no longer separate them. "Get some rest tonight," Whitmore said, rising from his desk. "Both of you. There's a boarding house 2 streets over run by a widow named Mrs. Callahan. Decent rooms, decent food, and she won't ask more questions than you're willing to answer. I'll send word the moment anything comes back on the wire." They left the marshal's office into a night grown fully dark, the town's lamplight spilling warm and golden across the dirt streets, and Emma found herself staring at ordinary things. A saloon's piano music drifting faint on the air, a dog trotting past on some errand of its own, 2 men laughing outside a general store, with something like wonder, as if she'd forgotten entirely that ordinary life continued to exist somewhere beyond wolves and rifles and rushing rivers. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" Noah said, watching her reaction. "After what we've been through, all this looking so normal." "It feels like a different world," Emma admitted. "I keep expecting to hear gunfire or see riders coming over a ridge. It's hard to believe it's actually over." "Give it time," Noah said. "Body doesn't let go of danger as fast as the mind wants it to. Took me the better part of a year after the war before ordinary sounds stopped putting me on edge. They walked together toward the boarding house, and Mrs. Callahan turned out to be exactly as Whitmore had described, a sharp-eyed widow who took one look at the state of them both and immediately set about drawing a hot bath, producing clean clothes from some seemingly bottomless store of donated goods, and refusing every attempt at explanation until they'd both eaten a proper meal. Emma sank into that bath that evening and wept not from fear this time, but from the sheer overwhelming release of finally truly being safe, of feeling warm water against skin that had spent 2 days coated in trail dust and fierce sweat and dried blood from a graze she'd nearly forgotten about entirely in the chaos of survival. She emerged from that bath feeling for the first time in days something like herself again, though a self reshaped by everything she'd survived, carrying it now as part of her rather than as a wound still bleeding. The next morning brought news, though not the news Emma had been praying for. Marshal Whitmore arrived at the boarding house just after breakfast, his expression carefully measured in a way that told Emma immediately he was choosing his words with great care. "Wire came back overnight," he said. "Your family's wagon train reached Fort Larned 3 days back. They reported you missing to the fort commander there. Seems they realized you weren't with them about 6 hours after the fact, tried doubling back, but a raiding party had moved through the area you were left in, and they judged it too dangerous to search further without risking the rest of the train." Emma's breath caught. "They tried to come back." "They did," Whitmore confirmed. "Your father especially, from what the fort commander's report says. Had to be near physically restrained from riding back alone. Wagon master made the call to keep the train moving, judged it the only way to keep everyone else alive, but your family didn't leave you behind. Easy, Miss Morgan. Wanted you to know that." Tears rose hot and sudden in Emma's eyes, relief and grief tangling together in a way she hadn't expected. "Are they still at Fort Larned?" "They were 3 days back when the report was filed. Whether they've moved on since I can't say for certain, but I've sent a wire requesting word be passed along and requesting they hold position if at all possible until we can arrange to bring you to them or bring them to you." "How long will that take?" "Days most likely. Could be faster if the wire lines hold steady, could be slower if there's trouble along the route." Whitmore's expression softened. "I know that's not the answer you were hoping for, but it's honest, and it's more than a lot of families separated on the trail ever get." Emma nodded, swallowing hard against the tangle of emotions rising in her chest, and beside her Noah's hand found hers steady and warm, grounding her the way it had a dozen times over the last 2 days. "They'll come," Noah said quietly. "A father who nearly rode back alone into raider territory for his daughter, that's not a man who's given up hoping." "I know," Emma said. I don't know how to wait. Not after everything." "Then don't wait empty-handed," Whitmore said, an idea clearly forming behind his eyes. "Pueblo could use another set of capable hands while you're here, regardless of how long the wire takes. Mrs. Callahan mentioned the schoolhouse lost its teacher to marriage last spring, and they have been making do with substitutes ever since. You've got schooling, I'd wager, given how you carry yourself and speak." "I do," Emma said, surprised by the sudden shift in conversation. "Finished my studies back in Ohio before we set out west." "Then maybe there's something useful for you to do with these days of waiting, besides just waiting," Whitmore said. "Talk to the schoolhouse committee, see if it interests you. No obligation, of course. Just an option if idle waiting doesn't suit you." Emma turned the idea over in her mind, feeling something unexpected stir beneath the grief and worry, a flicker of possibility of purpose in a life that had been entirely defined by survival for the last 2 days. "I think," she said slowly, "I'd like that very much." The schoolhouse committee, made up of 3 stern-faced women and 1 kindly older man who ran the general store, interviewed Emma that very afternoon, and within an hour had offered her the position on a trial basis, impressed by both her education and Emma suspected by the story of her ordeal that had already begun circulating through Pueblo's tight-knit community with the speed such stories always traveled. Noah, meanwhile, found himself summoned back to the marshal's office, and when Emma met him for supper that evening at Mrs. Callahan's table, she could see immediately that something significant had happened. "What is it?" she asked. "You look like a man who's been handed something he doesn't know what to do with." "Because I have been," Noah admitted, a strange mixture of surprise and reluctance in his voice. "Whitmore offered me a position, deputy marshal here in Pueblo. Said after today and after everything I laid out about Barlow's operation, he could use a man who knows the territory this well on his permanent payroll, instead of calling on me only when trouble's already started. Emma felt something leap in her chest, hope and hesitation intertwined. Are you going to take it? Don't rightly know, Noah said. Spent most of my adult life drifting from job to job, scouting here, running cattle there, never staying anywhere long enough to put down anything resembling roots. Not sure I know how to be a man who stays in one place. Do you want to know? Emma asked quietly. Or does the drifting suit you better than staying ever could? Noah was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup slowly between his hands. And when he finally answered, his voice carried a rawness Emma hadn't heard from him, even in the worst of their danger on the trail. Used to think the drifting suited me fine, he said. Used to think a man like me, with the things I've done, the things I've seen, best not to plant roots anywhere. Best not to give life a chance to take something else away from me. The way it took that young private I told you about, the way it's taken most everything I ever let myself care about. He paused. But these last 2 days have got me wondering if maybe I've been telling myself that story so long, I forgot to check whether it was even true anymore. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs, understanding the weight of what he was circling toward, without quite saying outright. And now, Noah said, meeting her eyes directly, I'm thinking maybe there's something in Pueblo worth staying for. Something I didn't expect to find on a trail I've ridden 100 times without ever finding anything worth changing my whole life over. The words hung between them, warm and fragile and enormous, and Emma felt tears rise again. Though these carried none of the grief from earlier in the day, only something achingly hopeful instead. I'd like it, she said softly, if you stayed. Noah reached across the table and took her hand, and neither of them said anything more that evening, though the silence between them carried more meaning than words might have managed. The following days passed in a strange, suspended rhythm, Emma settling into her new role at the schoolhouse, discovering an unexpected joy in the work that gave her something to focus on, besides anxious waiting, while Noah accepted the deputy position and began learning the particulars of Pueblo's law enforcement under Whitmore's steady guidance. Each evening they found their way back to each other, sharing supper, sharing the small, ordinary details of days that felt increasingly like the beginning of something neither of them had expected to find. Then 6 days after their arrival in Pueblo, word finally came. Emma was mid-lesson, chalk in hand, when the schoolhouse door burst open and one of the marshal's deputies appeared breathless from running. Miss Morgan, he said, Marshal wants you down at his office right away. Word's come in, it's about your family. Emma's hand trembled so badly she nearly dropped the chalk entirely, and she managed only a hasty word to her students before hurrying out into the street, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and hope, so intense it nearly buckled her knees. She found Noah already at the marshal's office when she arrived, having been summoned separately, and the look on both their faces. Whitmore's carefully composed Noah's tense with barely restrained hope told her this was finally the moment she'd been waiting 6 agonizing days for. Well, she managed to ask. Your family's train reached Pueblo's outer stations an hour ago, Whitmore said, and a smile finally broke across his weathered face. They diverted their whole route the moment word reached them. You were alive and here. Should be arriving in town within the hour. Emma's legs nearly gave out entirely, and Noah's arm came around her, instantly steadying her the way he had a dozen times before on the trail, though this time the thing threatening to overwhelm her was joy instead of fear. They're really here, she whispered. They're really coming. They are, Whitmore confirmed. And from what the outrider tells me, your father's been half out of his mind with worry the entire way. Man's apparently talked of nothing else since the wire reached them. Emma didn't remember much of the walk to the edge of town after that. Her mind entirely consumed with anticipation, Noah's steady presence beside her, the only thing keeping her grounded as the minutes stretched unbearably long. When the first wagons finally crested the rise leading into Pueblo, Emma's breath caught entirely, and she broke into a run before conscious thought could catch up with instinct. Emma, her mother's voice breaking on her name, and then her mother was there, arms wrapping around her so tight it nearly hurt both of them, sobbing openly in the middle of Pueblo's main street with no thought at all for who might be watching. Her father arrived seconds later, pulling both of them into an embrace that shook with the force of 2 days' worth of terror, finally fully released. We tried to come back, her father said, voice cracking. God is my witness, Emma, we tried, but the wagon master... I know Papa, Emma said, pulling back enough to look at his face, weathered and aged, somehow even in these few short days. I know you tried, Marshal Whitmore told me everything. I don't blame you, not for a single moment. We thought you were gone, her mother sobbed. We thought we'd lost you forever, and every mile since has felt like walking through fire, not knowing. I'm here, Emma said, holding her mother tight. I'm here and I'm safe, and it's because of him. She turned, extending a hand toward Noah, who had hung back respectfully during the reunion, clearly uncertain of his place in this overwhelming moment of family joy. Emma's father's eyes found him taking in the deputy's badge, now pinned to his chest, the hard, weathered face of a man who had clearly seen violence and survived it. This is Noah Tanner, Emma said. He found me the morning after you left, protected me from wolves, from outlaws, brought me safely all the way to Pueblo, through more danger than I ever want to describe in full detail. I wouldn't be standing here without him. Emma's father crossed the distance and gripped Noah's hand with a fierce, grateful intensity that needed no further words to convey its meaning. There's no way I can properly repay what you've done, he said, voice thick with emotion. You saved my daughter's life. That's a debt I'll carry the rest of my days. No debt owed, Noah said quietly. Would have done it for anyone I found in that situation. Just glad I was riding that stretch of trail when I did. Emma's mother studied Noah with the sharp, assessing eyes of a mother who missed nothing, taking in the way her daughter stood close to him, the way their hands had found each other again, almost without conscious thought. Something knowing crossed her expression, though she said nothing of it directly, only offering Noah a warm, grateful smile that carried more meaning than words might have. The reunion continued through the afternoon, Emma's family settling temporarily into Pueblo, while decisions were made about whether to continue west or establish themselves somewhere closer. And through it all, Emma found herself dividing her attention between the joy of her family's presence and an awareness constant and warm of Noah nearby present in a way that had become as essential to her as breathing itself. That evening, once the initial flood of reunion and relief had settled into something calmer, Emma's father found a quiet moment to speak with her alone, away from the noise of the gathered family. Your mother tells me there's something between you and that deputy, he said, not unkindly studying her with the careful attention he'd always given her since childhood. Something more than gratitude for saving your life. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she didn't deny it. I think there is, Papa. I know it's fast. I know we've known each other only a matter of days. But what we went through together, it wasn't ordinary days. It was days that showed me exactly who he is all the way down. No pretense, no performance. Just a man who chose to do right by a stranger even when it cost him everything. Her father considered this for a long moment, and Emma braced herself for caution, for concern about propriety and haste, the kind of objections she half expected, given how quickly everything had unfolded. Instead, he simply nodded. I watched him today, he said. Watched how he held himself, how he spoke, how careful he was not to overstep, even standing right beside the woman he clearly cares for. That's not a man performing for an audience, Emma. That's a man showing you who he actually is. He paused. Your mother and I don't need much convincing after what he did for you out there. If he's what you want, you have our blessing for whatever that's worth to you. It's worth everything, Emma said, embracing her father tightly, gratitude and love and relief all tangled together in a way that finally fully allowed her to feel the true weight of everything the last week had given her. The following weeks unfolded with a gentleness that felt almost unreal after the violence and danger that had defined Emma's arrival in the territory. Her family, after much discussion, decided to settle in Pueblo rather than continue the long journey further west, drawn partly by the town's growing prosperity and partly, Emma suspected, by an unspoken understanding that their daughter's future had already taken root there in ways none of them fully anticipated. Emma continued teaching at the schoolhouse, discovering a genuine passion for the work that surprised her with its depth-finding purpose in watching children grasp new ideas and building something steady and lasting in a town that had, against all odds, become home. Noah settled fully into his role as deputy marshal, earning quick respect throughout Pueblo for both his skill and his quiet, steady integrity, the same qualities that had carried Emma safely across 100 miles of dangerous territory, now serving an entire community instead of just one frightened girl. They found their way to each other most evenings, sharing supper, sharing the small, accumulating details of ordinary life that felt after everything, like the greatest gift either of them had ever received. Emma watched Noah slowly unlearn the guarded distance he'd carried for so many years, watched him laugh more easily, watched the hard lines of his face soften in moments that had nothing to do with danger or survival at all. One evening, nearly 2 months after that first terrible morning, beside the broken trunk, Noah found her after school let out waiting outside the schoolhouse with something clearly weighing on his mind. "Walk with me," he asked. They walked together toward the edge of town past the last scattered buildings and out toward open land where Pueblo's lights glowed warm behind them and the vast Colorado sky stretched endless and darkening overhead. Noah was quiet for longer than usual, and Emma sensed something significant building beneath his silence. "Noah," she said finally, "what is it you've been strange all evening?" He stopped walking and turned to face her fully, and in the fading light she could see something raw and vulnerable in his expression that she'd rarely glimpsed even in their most dangerous moments together on the trail. "When I found you that morning," he said, "sitting by that broken trunk, scared out of your mind, but still thinking clear enough to defend yourself with a fire iron, I told you something, told you that you ride with me now. Wasn't thinking past that moment when I said it. Wasn't thinking about anything beyond getting you somewhere safe." "I remember," Emma said softly. "What I didn't know then," Noah continued, his voice roughening with emotion he no longer tried to hide, "was that when I said those words, I wasn't just choosing to protect you for a few days on a dangerous trail. I was choosing my whole future without even realizing it. Every day since has just been me catching up to what my heart apparently already understood back on that very first morning." Emma's breath caught, understanding exactly where this was heading, her heart hammering with an anticipation entirely different from the terror she'd felt riding away from danger weeks before. Noah knelt slowly, drawing a small object from his coat pocket, and Emma pressed a hand to her mouth as understanding fully dawned. "Emma Morgan," he said, voice steady despite the emotion clearly running beneath it. "You came into my life in the middle of the worst danger I've faced since the war, and somehow, impossibly, you became the best thing that's ever happened to me. I don't have much to offer beyond a deputy's modest wage and a man who's spent too many years running from the idea of staying anywhere. But everything I do have, I want to build alongside you for as long as you'll let me. Noah, will you marry me?" Tears spilled freely down Emma's cheeks, now joy so complete it left no room for anything else. "Being left behind on that trail," she said, voice thick with emotion, "was the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me. But it led me here. It led me to you. And I wouldn't trade a single moment of that terror if it means arriving at this one. Is that a yes?" "That's an absolutely, completely, without any doubt whatsoever yes." Noah rose and pulled her into an embrace that held all the accumulated weight of everything they'd survived together, and Emma laughed through her tears, feeling for the first time in her entire life the profound and settled certainty of having found exactly where she belonged. They married 3 weeks later in Pueblo's small church. Emma's entire family present, along with a surprising number of townsfolk who had come to know and respect both Emma's teaching and Noah's steady service as deputy. Marshal Whitmore stood as witness, remarking afterward that he'd never seen two people more clearly meant for each other, forged together by fire in a way that made their bond stronger than most marriages built on gentler beginnings. They built a modest home on the edge of town, close enough for Emma to continue her teaching, close enough for Noah to answer whenever duty called. And in the months that followed, Pueblo watched them settle into a partnership defined by the same qualities that had carried them safely across 100 miles of dangerous territory: mutual respect, unshakable trust, and a quiet, steady devotion that needed no dramatic declarations to prove its depth. The story of Emma Morgan, abandoned on the trail and found by a cowboy who refused to ride past a stranger in need, became something of a local legend. In Pueblo, told and retold at gatherings, offered as proof that even the cruelest twists of fate sometimes carried within them the seeds of something extraordinary. Mothers told it to daughters who felt overlooked or forgotten. Fathers told it to sons, learning what it meant to stand up for someone else, even at great personal cost. And Emma and Noah themselves, whenever asked, told it simply and honestly, never dressing up the terror of those first days, never pretending the danger had been anything less than real, because that was the truth of it. The truth Emma had come to understand more deeply with every passing year of their marriage. Being left behind on that trail had been the worst thing that had ever happened to her, and it had also impossibly, undeniably been the beginning of everything good that followed. She had been abandoned in the wilderness with nothing but a broken trunk and a shawl and a fire iron she barely knew how to use. She had faced wolves and outlaws and rushing rivers and gunfire that had come close enough to draw blood. She had lost for a handful of terrifying days everything she had ever known as safe and familiar. And in losing all of that, she had found something she never could have found any other way. A man whose quiet strength matched her own resilience. A partnership built not on comfort or convenience, but on the hardest, most honest foundation two people could ever build a life upon. Emma Morgan had been left behind on the trail with no one. And the cowboy who stepped in, who spoke four simple words that changed the entire course of her life, had given her not just survival, but a future she could never have imagined for herself. Back on that terrible ordinary morning, when she'd walk down to a creek for water and come back to find her whole world gone. That was the story Pueblo told for years afterward, and it was every single word of it true.